All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming to this talk. I submitted like 3 talks, and one about AI, one about attacks, and the panel decided to choose this one, which is arguably the most unsexy one. However, I have to say that this talk, I have given it as a webinar, and 800 people attended. And it's in YouTube, and there is 1,500 views already. And I got around 100 questions on NIS2. So it's a topic that is really important. And if you fear, and maybe that's why there's not that many people here, that I am going to argue with you that you need to run because NIS2 is going to force you to do and buy unidirectional gateways or whatever. That's not this talk. This talk is about teaching you how to convince your management, the people, or if you're a manager, to understand how to get money using NIS2. Because NIS2 is not an OT, is written by politics. So you need to understand what's inside in order for you to weaponize it and use it for your own benefit. So this is me, like if you want to keep in touch, that's my LinkedIn and my X or Twitter or whatever. I am the director of industrial security at Waterfall, but also I am a lecturer at the Universidad Politécnica Catalunya. I teach a master on rail cybersecurity, which basically I teach 62443 and TS 50701. If you are in rail, that's the new standard. I am a former hacker and opinionated thinker, I will say. I have been the chair for security at the Industrial IoT Consortia and chair at the Trusted Computing Group, etc. So I have done quite a bit of work on that. Let's talk about NIS2. Okay, so what's the NIS2 basics? There is 27 member states that are going to be impacted by this new directive, and we'll talk about the regulation, directive, and all that stuff, There are 46 articles in the NIS2 directive, although there is a preamble where they talk about what is NIS2. One thing is that it's not difficult it's in every language, Polish, Danish, Spanish. You can download it and read it, so it doesn't, it's 100 pages, You can use it for going to sleep if you want to. But the main important points, the main point that people are very worried is this, the 10 million euros as a possible fine if you don't comply, right? Or 2% of your global turnover. That's a lot of money, and we'll discuss a little bit about this. And the deadline for transposition into law is October 17, 2024. Now, some vocabulary to get out of the way. There is the CCERT that if you are into, and if you have complied, that most of you will have with NIS, you know what it is. It's the Computer Security Incident Response Team, which, your country, Poland, or whatever country you are from, will have one. NIS2 talks about essential and important entities. That's a differentiation that wasn't in NIS, which it changes the obligations that you have to have. But right now, it's a very fine line there. So let's just understand that there is 2 entities. And then the EU Cyclone, which I love this name. I can see our politicians working hard to get into a name. What would be a cool name to have for like a pan-European, body which is receives information from all the CSIRTs, and that's the EU Cyclone, which is a new entity created in order to collect all the information from all these CSIRTs. Now, this is the timeline. After 2 years of deliberating, our politicians came into saying NIS was not working. We'll discuss why. So they decided to do something new. October 17 is the deadline where everybody has to transpose this directive into the national law, and we'll discuss what the directive and laws and regulations are in a second. That's important for you to understand. And then this will go through iterations, and then on 2027, they will revise the directive. Now, a fair question will be for you to say, in the world of AI, where I can ask ChatGPT what the NIS2 directive is, why are you giving this talk, right? Well, this talk is for you to go behind what NIS2 can provide you. And also, the logic of NIS2 is a little bit skewed, as you can see there, in particular with logic. And the third thing is that I have realized that NIS2 hates cybersecurity professionals. If you ask, make a joke about cybersecurity, it always goes onto how bad we are. It's just like, so I think it thinks that we are the enemy. So be careful with ChatGPT more talking about cybersecurity. But I did that as a webinar. But why I'm doing this is that the NIS2 predominantly focuses on IT. However, it is an OT focus strategy because it tries to improve the infrastructure or critical systems, and most critical systems are OT. So even if the language is IT-centric, the goal is OT-centric. You can determine how your company falls into NIS2. That's one of the biggest questions I received. But what I really want you to is to equip you to the ways to understand this directive and weaponize it for your own benefit, for your company's benefit, for your country's benefit, to get money from politicians, to get the things done that needs to be done in your critical infrastructure. Now, language is important, and you have to understand these different languages that they use to do all these things. So we have directives, and what is a directive? A directive is something that a legal document that the European Union puts together, and then every country needs to transpose into their own law however they want. However, they have to follow the goals of the directive, okay? So NIS2 is a directive, so it needs to be transposed into law by your country. And how every country does it is different. However, depends on how vague the directive is on the goals, it will be more strict or more similar. And that was the problem with NIS, which we'll discuss why NIS failed. National law is the law that every country uses, and it will be fines, it will be whatever is the laws that your country has, and you have the law that your parliament comes together. A regulation is different. A regulation is something that the EU Parliament passes, and then every country has to follow as they passed. So it's kind of a law that the EU Parliament passes, and that is a mess. GDPR, for example, is a regulation. So you don't have the chance as a country to say, well, I will twist it a little bit because my country is different. No, every country has to do whatever the regulation says. And the new one, the CRA, is a regulation. Probably you discuss about CRA. That's going to be a mess because, again, not every country can be a little bit different because my country has a different way of doing things. No, everybody has to follow the regulation. Remember the cookies? Do you want to use a cookie? Yes, that's because GDPR is a regulation and it's for everybody to do it wherever they want it or not, right? And then there is standards. And standards are not a regulation, not a law, but a bunch of people getting together and saying, we should follow these ways of doing things because are good. And as we will see, NIS2 points to standards in order to follow the directive. So what is NIS2? NIS2 is an enhanced directive that is succeeding NIS-D. What it wants to is strengthen cybersecurity in the European Union. The directive is a directive. So a lot of people say, well, Jesus, why are you talking about NIS2 if you don't know how in October Poland or Norway, well, not Norway because actually it's not in the EU, but Spain or France will transpose into law? Well, I will discuss this, but the difference between NIS2 and NIS-D is NIS2 is much more prescriptive. You have a number which is defined, it is much more prescriptive. And the targets, we'll discuss it a little bit, but it's basically all you guys, all OT infrastructure. Now, if you want to track how every country transposes it, you can go to the Europe.eu and you can see how exactly every country, like Poland, for example, transcribe the NIS directive into law. So you can also check. So you can check how your country is forcing you to do that. But why? What's the problem with NIS2? NIS2 has been probably implemented by most of you. So what is the problem with that, right? First, it was not harmonized. NIS2 tried to harmonize cybersecurity, and it failed miserably. Why? Because countries like the UK, that now they are not in the European Union, but used to be, put $17 million in fines. Pounds. While other countries, which I will not name, put like $100,000 in fines. Obviously, the level of cybersecurity that the UK put forward and the changes it happened in the UK was much different with other countries where almost had no fines. So that's a big difference. They expanded the scope because there were a lot of entities, in particular manufacturing, where they say, well, we're not part of NIS2, we don't care. And that's why today we have this, well, that's my thinking, that in Europe we have this problem with ransomware in manufacturing because their cybersecurity, because there was no regulation, is minimal, is really, really low. So again, the third point, probably the more important one, is to enhance accountability. The accountability before, between countries, it was not harmonized. Again, I said $70 million pounds in the UK versus 10,000, 100,000 in other countries. That's ridiculous. So they wanted to have saying, if you don't do your job, you will have accountability. But perhaps the most misunderstood point is the spending. The European Union spends very little in cybersecurity, in particular compared to the US. It's insanely low how little, in particular in OT, but in general cybersecurity, the UE, until now that they see, Russia and all that stuff, then they say, well, maybe we should do something. But the spending is very, very low. Anyway, so this graph tells you exactly what NIS2, the changes that NIS2 are transitioning to NIS2. There are more entities. It's much more clear which entities are going to be covered by NIS2. In the past, it was like, well, every country in NIS2, they said, well, every country decides which are the critical infrastructures. And some countries choose 20, some countries choose 1, right? So this time is very clear. If you have more than 10 million in revenue, more than 49 employees, or more than 43 million in balance, and you are part of one of these verticals, then you're critical. You are part of NIS2. It's way more prescriptive. You cannot just say, well, this water management system, I don't care, it's not critical. No, now it's critical if it has more than 49 employees. So it's much more. Still, every country will make the list, but now they have to follow this. If not, they will be punished by the European Union. Now, what is new? Food production, manufacturing of certain elements like chemicals, medical, etc., now fall under NIS2. Also interesting is that some connected entities, and that's a little bit what may there will be wiggle room between countries, will be also impacted. If you have subcontractors, etc., also may fall into NIS2. But that's a little bit difficult to read when you read the actual NIS2. So also the CRA regulation probably will be part of this mess. But again, what has absolutely changed is the fines. The fines and the way you report has dramatically changed. In NIS2 was like, you report whatever, now there's a timeline. In NIS2, it was, well, the fines, you choose them, now they are set. So this is a radical change between NIS2 and NIS2. Now, what about you guys, okay, let me go back. What about you guys, you're saying, okay, that's good, but I have read NIS2, Jesus, and it doesn't say anything about OT, so why should we care? Well, first, manufacturing is part now in NIS2, and manufacturing has been attacked a lot lately, and there has been physical consequences. We have this report where the manufacturing sector is disproportionately affected by ransomware. As a result, machines have stopped. There has been physical consequences, and that's something that manufacturing needs to understand. You cannot do cybersecurity as used to. You have to improve. But the two articles that are important to us, OT professionals, are the Article 21 and Article 23. These two articles are the one that you can either use them to get money and to say, hey, we have to do something about it, or it can come back to you in 5 years because you get a fine, right? Because these articles are the only ones that will make you liable. And the Article 21 is about mandate adequate security measures, and Article 23 mandates fast and accurate reporting of cyber attack. This also Article 25, which encourages the use of US standards. That's important. And we'll discuss a little bit what these articles, but when you talk about NIS2, the only articles that you really, because the other ones are just going around on what government agencies need to be created and how things will work, but Article 21 and Article 23 are the important ones. In particular, Article 21. Now, I am pasting here verbatim, so I didn't change a word there. I did put black quotes there to understand, is Article 21. And one thing that has changed between NIS-D and NIS-2 is this article. Article 21 says that you should take appropriate and proportional technical, operational, and organizational measures to manage the risk. And taking into account the state-of-the-art and where applicable relevant European standards, you have to create measures to prevent that risk. This is important because that means that you need to do measures depending on the risk that the attack will pose to you. So it's not the same if you have a shoe factory than if you have a nuclear power plant. The measures you need to take in order to prevent the attack needs to be according to the risk. That's important, and that's what you have to tell your boss, the people giving you money, is that, look, NIS2 is telling us that OT, we know what the risk is. You know what the consequences could be. You need to prioritize this, because NIS2 tell us that if they know that we knew that there was a risk and we didn't take the appropriate measures, we'll make me fined millions of dollars. That's the key here, the fact that you have to take appropriate measures. And we know the appropriate measures are not anymore about the probability of an attack, because that can dramatically change. We have these reports, and what we do here is we take all the attacks against OT, and we tally them, and we look at them and say, which of these attacks to OT had physical consequences? We do that every year since 2021. And that's a lot of work, because we go to every attack and say, this attack had physical consequences, right? These attacks are on the record, so these attacks, there might be many more, So we have been doing that. And 2010, we have the Stuxnet. 2017, we have the two attacks, 2016, 2017 in Ukraine. So you have seen that attacks with physical consequences were rare, very rare. 1, 2, 3, 5. In total, before 2019, there were 12. Between 2019 and 2024, there have been hundreds. That's a change. That's attacks that actually impacted machinery, this is a change of mindset. The consequence has changed. NIS2 says clearly, if the consequence is exploding something, stopping machinery, rails, trains not running, that's a bigger consequence than losing data. You need to change other measures. This is also Article 23, which Article 23 says that you need to report. And this is also something that will change a lot how we work, because what this says is that you if you know that your system has been attacked, you need to report it in 24 hours. That's super soon. Probably you don't even have a chance to know if this attack is actually consequential or not, but you need to report it. And after that, after 72 hours, you have to do an actual incident notification. So the transparency we will see in Europe of all the attacks that's going to happen is going to change a lot. Also, before, you only have to report to the CSIRT, to your local CSIRT. Now the EU cyclone may take appropriate actions if they see that many countries have been attacked at the same time. That is also a big change. And if you don't do that, you can actually be fined. So Article 22.1 and Article 23 will be the ones that you need to look at. One, appropriate measures. Second, reporting, and fast. There's another article, which is Article 26, which is, when you ask me, well, Jesus, how people will transpose this. Article 26 is the one that is very wishy-washy. It's a supply chain, which is very important. But it doesn't say how you have to do it. It says every country can do the supply chain however they want. Obviously, now with the CRA regulation, which is not a directive, it's a regulation, this is obviously a little bit more, I would say more clear, but that's going to mean that some countries will say, well, only, things for my country or any things that are like certified by 62443 4-2 should be in the supply chain. Others will do something different. So how every country will do Article 26 is not as clear. It's a little bit like NIS2. Every country can do. In other things like fines, it's much more clear. Every country has to put 10 million, period, or more. So it can be 15 million, but cannot be less than 10 million. Now, I want to give you some examples on how Article 21, I believe, should be implemented. And the number one question that people ask me in my webinar was, if I implement 62443, I am compliant with NIS2? And my answer is definitely no. You are not going to be compliant, in my opinion, with NIS2 if you comply with 62443. Why? Because 62443 was meant for manufacturing. There is not a safety information in 62443. For me, NIS, if you have a sub-factory, if you have a manufacturing system, 62443 may work. If you have a nuclear power plant, a rail infrastructure, something that kill people, 62443 is not enough. NCSS, which is the network codes, which is a regulation, basically says something like that. If you have high impact, then you can use 62443. If you have critical impact, you have to use even more advanced controls. And that's a regulation. Another one, which for me makes more sense, because I am one person that believes that you need to apply standards depending on the OT system you are in. I teach this. I teach rail cybersecurity. I have a master with 24 people, and they are rail experts from Talgo, from Renfe, from Adif. And it's interesting because when you teach them this, which is TS 50701, they really like it. They really like the fact that somebody took the time to take 62443 and overlaid and expand it to cover safety systems in rail, to cover signaling systems, to say that the Purdue model doesn't work in rail, because it does not. It's not that 4-3-2-1, can be 4-to-cloud, can be 4-to-1, can be different. And that is going to be the thing that I believe is going to happen. Every different vertical should take 6443 and modify it in order to understand what's important. So for example, if you are doing NIS2 and you want to be compliant with NIS2, you should look at TS 50701 or 6245, the new the standard that is going to be coming from it, not 6443, because 6443 in rail is not enough. You need to account for signaling systems, for legacy systems. So you need to understand the risks much better. Now, are there similarities between NIS2 and the US? And I say, in particular when reporting, it's very similar. Obviously, in the US, they try always to avoid regulations because people hate it there, but they have like a big document where they try to look at the Biden-Harris cybersecurity agenda. One thing they say is like they want enhanced reporting, they want to evolve the infrastructure, but the US, unlike Europe, is very reactive. If something happens, you have a reaction. What happened, was big in the US, was the Colonial Pipeline attack. And when that happened, they went very fast, put in TSA to put something about it, say like, now we want that OT and IT should work separately, Like if IT is attacked, we want the OT to keep working. So they put some wording for companies to do that. We don't do that in Europe. We will have more like a way of like involving politicians for 5 years. But again, they are kind of like going in the same direction, is that the risk is increasing. You need to put cybersecurity depending on the risk of your system. You cannot think only data can be the only thing you're going to lose. You can lose other things like people not being able to pump gas. You need to understand that AI is coming, and AI may create new payloads that we never thought about it, and much more subtle, where it affects us slowly. So we need to understand that things are changing, and the fact that we're going to report more and more and more is going to change things quite a bit. So what I want this talk was about not to say NIS2 is coming, you need to do something about it in October. It's about how you guys can take NIS2 and weaponize it. Use it for your own purposes. Understand that when you talk with somebody, you say, I know what Article 21 says. Article 21 says that IT is not as important as OT. Article 21 says that if IT is losing data, well, that's one thing. But if OT is impacted, and because of that, one town, Katowice, stops having power, then the fine will be much higher. And if we just put a crappy firewall, and that happens because we put that crappy firewall, then we'll be liable for it. You may be personally liable under NIS2. So that has changed. So we need to convince people that they need to put the money not in more encryption, whatever, in IT, but they have to understand the consequences. And the consequence will drive the spending. Article 21 is, again, the most important thing. The risk evaluation now is all important. You need to focus and say, hey, these are the parts of our system that needs to be expanded. Article 23, you need to understand the reporting. Now it's much faster. And because of the reporting will happen before even you know that this is a cyber attack that has consequences, that means that you will be much more exposed. So you should try to stop the attacks even if the attacker at the end doesn't do anything, because the attack itself will mean you have to report it, and it will escalate very quickly. The accountability has changed quite a bit, like now, before accountability was maybe 10,000, maybe 100,000. Now, it's very high, millions. But also, there is language in NIS2 that say, you may be held personally accountable. There is language there that says that, like, if you find a person that make the choice of doing that, they have a way to say, taken out, basically fired. So there is wording saying that you may be personally accountable. Finally, you need to look at the EU standards in order to comply with the law. And so if you use the standards that are 62443 for power, for example, that may fly. I'm not saying that somebody say, well, that's enough, because it's the best we have. There's another standard for power, I don't remember now, but but if you know that 6443 is very crappy when it comes to saying that a zone 4 to zone 2 needs something, and you can put a crappy firewall with zone 4 and zone 3, and you still will be complying with 6443 because it doesn't say what conduits you need. That's what my students ask me in my class. It's like, okay, so if I put a crappy firewall between zone 4 and zone 3, can I get away with it? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a conduit, so you need to also evaluate it. But the problem is that you need to go beyond the lines. You need to look at, how do you actually want to prevent the risk in your systems? And you have to use better tools that are more according to the risk. So, to zoom up, just understand that the risk has changed in our zone, that the types of consequences have changed, and NIS2 is all about consequences. So use that in order to improve our infrastructure, because it's something that we definitely need to put more spending and to improve our critical infrastructure. To finalize, my company, Waterfall, which you see the booth there, really tries to provide this kind of improved or next level, critical things. But, you can go and look at what we do to do that. But, the key point here is that we need better infrastructure, and NIS2 can help us achieve it. So don't see it as a foe, something that you have to fear, but something that you need to weaponize and use in order to be better. Thank you so much.